This episode is brought to you by TaxAct. Don't do your taxes alone. Join TaxAct's National Admin Night. Admin nights are social gatherings for getting through your to-do list. So get ready for a night of fun, finding deductions, and filing taxes with TaxAct, where you can file your federal and state return for just $49 through April 8. Let's get together and get them over with. Visit taxact.com/admin-night for details.
October is here, and that means it's time for pumpkin patches, apple cider, chilly weather, and staying informed ahead of the election right around the corner. There's no better place to stay up to date on the latest headlines than the DSR Network, and there's no better way to enjoy our podcast than by becoming a member. DSR members get access to exclusive content, our Discord and Slack communities, an ad-free listening experience, and more. Right now, you can get 30% off your membership by going to thedsrnetwork.com/buy and using code BOO. That's thedsrnetwork.com/buy and use code BOO. We hope you enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode. My very special guest today is Pulitzer-prize winning journalist, founder of Politifact, and the author of a new book all about the history and current state of lying in politics. Yes, surprise, surprise, people, politicians lie, and some lie more than others. The important part is that Bill Adair, my guest, tells us what can and should be done about it. It's not too late, my friends. A little bit of housekeeping before we get on to the good stuff. All the recipes for the podcast and links can be found on my Substack newsletter at marissarothkopf.substack.com. You can support my work with a subscription for $5 a month, or if that's not possible yet, you can please subscribe just for free. And don't forget to please join Deep State Radio as a member for special perks. Either way, I am grateful for your support.
Welcome to The Secret Life of Cookies, where we try to solve the world's problems through the miracle of carbohydrates, one recipe at a time, with host Marissa Rothkopf and her dog, Bosco.
Hello, and welcome to Bill Adair. I am more thrilled than I think, I don't know, maybe rightfully have the right to be, to have you here. Pulitzer-prize winning journalist, Knight Professor, I love the title, Knight Professor for the Practice of Journalism and Public Policy, and Director of the Duke Reporters Lab, a job I am very jealous of, and also author of my new favorite book, Beyond the Big Lie, The Epidemic of Political Lying, Why Republicans Do It More, and How It Could Burn Down Our Democracy. So just if you could just start speaking off the topic of the front cover of your book, that would be great. You sent this book to the publisher, it seems, judging by the lovely note that you wrote to your wife and everybody in the introduction, around April 2024. Is that correct?
Yeah, actually, that was the original due date. But as we realized we wanted to make it available to people before the election, I ended up turning it in last January, the first draft. So it was really early this year that I first turned it in.
Oh, and since then, there's been no lying. Has happened since then.
We have cured it. It's just so marvelous. This problem, I'm afraid nobody's going to buy the book because this problem is fixed.
Yeah. What a week. Am I right? As we are recording this, Hurricane Helene had devastated much of the Southeast 2 weeks ago. Last night, Hurricane Milton devastated much of the west coast of Florida, and we heard lies about FEMA and what they were doing. And if you'll pardon me, I have to go adjust the rain clouds over New Jersey with my space lasers, because apparently the Democrats are impacting the weather in our spare time. So these are lies that aren't amusing lies. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene's is sort of amusing until you realize the impact that it has on people.
No, they really are not amusing. I've talked to friends in Asheville where Helene stalled and flooded so much of Asheville and the mountains around it, and soon after the storm stopped, the lies began, and the lies came largely from the right, from Republicans who lied about what FEMA was doing, how FEMA was responding, what the North Carolina state government was doing. And it was really awful, because now it's not unusual for people to play politics with hurricane responses. I've seen that all my career as a journalist. Mm-hmm. I covered Hurricane Andrew in 1992. I was one of the hurricane reporters at the St. Petersburg Times, now the Tampa Bay Times. So I'm familiar with how storm responses can be political. But I've also seen politicians rise above that and realize that politics doesn't matter when there's been a disaster. And so it was really terrible to see, and it was at least a little bit encouraging to hear some Republican politicians say, hey, cut it out. Mm-hmm. And so you heard that from some Republicans, a state senator in particular, who said, this has really got to end. Everything that I've asked for has happened. We've gotten, the government response has been good. Mm-hmm. And so it's really, but the lies have continued, not just from politicians, but just from the sort of general trolling on social media, and that often has been from the right or right-leaning people, and who knows what. So it's really terrible to see that at a time of tragedy. And now with Milton in Florida, I'm sure we'll be seeing the same thing.
Right, and the implications are, that it or the effects of it are that people don't think that there's help out there for them to get, and people, especially in the Carolinas, people have been like, well, I've heard that there's nothing, so I'm not going to get it, and go and get the help that I need. So that what happens, and I watched yesterday, every person who came on the news, and I watched a lot of the news yesterday, said, please don't listen to this. Like every person who is in charge of, like a FEMA director or a local mayor in Florida said, don't listen to what you hear. Listen to a trusted source. And that was minutes, they had to waste their time talking about lies instead of, here's a shelter, here's what you need to do. So the implications or, the impact of these lies are very dangerous. And that's one of the things your book is very good about pushing forward.
Thank you. They really are. It's not just disasters. We saw it in COVID, and it's true about climate change. That I think the collective impact of lying about climate change all these years, all these decades, has been that we're paying the price. Because people have denied the facts about climate change for so long that we have not been able to put in place the sort of policies that are necessary to try to respond.
Absolutely. I think I explained to my students the other day what burying the lead was. And I sort of buried the lead here, which is you were the founder of Politifact. And I have to say, in my fangirl sort of way, that the day that I heard from your publicist that this great book was out, your book, I had just spent the morning talking to my intro to journalism class about Politifact and how we have an issue with and disinformation in journalism, and how, people see it as a problem with journalism, and how we as future journalists, or they as future journalists, can combat it. And so to me, that's why I'm like, I get to talk to Bill Adair. That's so exciting.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. I hope some of your students want to go into fact checking, because it's so important these days. And it actually, I think, is one of the growth areas in journalism. I've had a fair number of my students who've gone into fact checking and found good careers there, because when some of the other areas of journalism have been a little more up and down, fact checking has been a pretty good source of jobs. And because people have realized, journalism organizations have realized, hey, there's a need here. And so whether it's a big media organization like CNN, or smaller ones that focus exclusively on fact checking, like factcheck.org or PolitiFact, there are jobs out there for journalism grads.
And believe me, I talk to them about it, because I grew up in magazines where, meaning like my early days in journalism were in magazines where there would be enormous fact checking departments. Hi Matt, hi Carrie. I still remember all these lovely people, and I'm still in touch with them, but they don't have jobs anymore as fact checkers, right? It wasn't a job. That was a job that went away with early cuts and things in places like magazines. So it's heartening to hear that newspapers are understanding that, but there's still a whole world of information out there where people get their information, like social media, that isn't fact checked. And that's why. So how do we, as not as journalists, but we as like human beings who spend our days scrolling our phones, handle that?
Well, it's sort of the great blur of sources. So when we're scrolling our phones, a article from a trusted news source could show up in our feed right after an article from some untrusted news source. And so we have to, as consumers, be able to look for clues about what's trusted and not. And it's really no different than when you go to the grocery store and you're trying to determine, is this a quality product? And, and what to look for. And when you look at the packaging, this looks like it's packaged safely, and it's a company that I trust, and this is going to be a high quality product. And it's the same way with journalism. Mm-hmm. People should look for clues, and sometimes it's right in the web address, in the URL. And if it's got an unusual one that you don't recognize, you might be suspicious of it, just like you would be suspicious of a brand name that you don't know in the grocery store. Similarly, the advertising on fly-by-night websites is often fly-by-night advertising. It's this sort of like, do you have a fungus under your toenails?
Yes, those images. Can we just pause for a moment and talk about those fungus images that always seem to appear? I feel very targeted. Sometimes I will still show my students a web page, and they'll see the ads that show up in my feed, and they feel bad for people my age.
Well, and I suspect there's a correlation between ads for fungus under your toenails and poor credibility. Now, that's a study I want to see by, one of my academic friends, because I think there's a high correlation there. And so anyway, I think you need to be wary, and you need to be a suspicious consumer.
One of the stories that you tell in this in your book is about someone you interviewed recounts his mother looking at the Weekly World News in the supermarket checkout line.
I love that story. That's Kevin Madden, who's a Republican strategist who is one of the real good people in the book. And yeah, he talks about, and you have to be of a certain age to remember the Weekly World News at the grocery store when it was at the checkout counter, and it was this very questionable tabloid that was right there at the cashier, and and sometimes you'd pick it up and you'd like leaf through it, but then always put it back. And it was famous for the photoshopped
Fat Boy
photograph Fat Boy, exactly. And so I believe it was actually published by the same people that published the National Enquirer, but it was sort of their their really crazy news. And and Kevin's point that he makes in the book is you no longer have to be in the checkout line to get that. You get it right on your phone. And the problem is that people, they make a diet of that, and that's what they get a lot or over and over again or all the time. And so the digital age has done some wonderful things, and we can talk about that. And Politifact is one, I think, because it made it possible for us to do Politifact. But the digital age has also allowed people who in the analog and ink on paper days had to work harder to, one, get crazy stuff, and two, meet other people who liked crazy stuff. So like
right.
the guy who liked crazy stuff might live in one part of town, and someone else who liked crazy stuff lived in another part of town, but they would never meet. But thanks to the internet, they're all getting together, and every night is like is a party of people who like crazy stuff. So that's a real problem, and that's what we're dealing with, because those people love lying, and they fall for lies, and they share lies with larger audiences in ways that never happened in the past. And so the internet is sort of a great big party for people who are fooled by lies.
Right. The image that your friend left with me was this idea that I'm carrying the checkout line with me all the time now with my phone. I have two directions that I want to go with you. And then we also do have to talk about IPA beers, which is relevant. I'm telling you all, this is relevant. Very relevant to a lot of this. But you now are, as a professor, are talking to students who have been raised in a completely different media environment than I was. You were, even though you look about 23, but yeah. How eye-opening. Your students helped you research this book in some way, and with the looking into the past of lying in politics and in general. And I wonder how eye-opening it was for them to see the long, storied history of misinformation.
Well, I think they learned a lot, but I also learned a lot from them, and they helped in countless ways. And I'm glad you mentioned their involvement in the book. So the original title for this book was simply The Lying Project. And I went into it with this idea to just tell the story of how and why politicians lie. And so I'm fortunate to work at Duke and to be able to work with really great undergrads who will help me with projects like this. And so I hired a bunch of them, and I taught a class in lying in politics. And so I think they learned a lot about the history of lying. There's one chapter that's called the Lying Hall of Fame, and they helped with that, and I think they learned from that, because I would have individual students write case studies of liars, and then we'd sort of decide, should that person or thing be in the Lying Hall of Fame? But then I also learned from them about how things have changed over the years, and it gave me perspective to make sure that I wasn't just an old guy, who was, shouting at clouds.
Right.
And so it was really helpful to have them along the ride, and they're amazing. They did everything from help transcribe interviews to write questions to by the end, one of my students was proofreading the PDFs of the book. So they were marvelous.
Those are wonderful skills that they're gaining from you. But have you learned about how your students have a different way of consuming media than we did? Even the students who are growing up to be the next great journalists of our time. And I wonder how they digest news is impacted by this sort of widespread view that the media lies.
Yes. Now, I'm probably getting a skewed view because they're students at Duke, and so they're more likely to, they get free subscriptions to the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. So they're probably not as typical of other people their age in some ways. But they are typical in this way. They're getting a lot of information from TikTok. They're getting a lot of information from Instagram. And so often their path into the news is an Instagram post. Hey, yeah, I saw that. I saw your Daily Show appearance on Instagram. And so, they're, and so it's not like they're sitting down with an iPad and reading the New York Times. They're getting individual articles and coming in through that. And it's really a reminder that the old sort of let's read the paper cover to cover approach is not their world.
My father would sit and read the newspaper for 2 hours in the morning, page by page, and then would complain about the ink on his fingers, and
right.
and then he would go to work, right? And somewhere in the New Yorker, I think they used to sell like gloves you could wear to read the New York Times with. Those days are gone. But let me just point out, this screen is very dirty. I'm just saying, it's probably dirtier than the New York Times was. This idea, though, of the lying media pervades everything. Even I find it, my students who are all, there to be journalism majors still come from families that don't believe in the news. I mean, they're like becoming journalism students. These kids are like, breaking with their family to do something in a sense that's considered a little off.
I had that. I had a student in a couple of my classes who one of my assignments was they had to watch a documentary about the New York Times, and to do that they had to buy the documentary on iTunes. And she was like, "Hey, could I watch your version because I don't want my parents to see on my iTunes account that I bought it." Because my parents are Fox News watchers. And so she really struggled, because the message from home was, we don't trust the liberal media. And so, even if she had wanted to go into journalism, and I'm not sure she did, the journalism was not going to be supported by her family. And that's troubling, and I think that speaks to years. And I talk about this in the book as it relates to fact checking, but it's of course true for the mainstream media. Years and years of anti-media commentary by people in conservative media. And that's especially true for fact checking, which is really troubling because it is, if you accept my conclusion that there is so much more lying on the right, it's the people on the right who are hearing all the lies, and they need the fact checking the most. So, but they're not accepting the fact checking because they're told constantly that they shouldn't believe it, and so that's really it's really worrisome to me.
So, I have read your book, and it supported my feelings that many more lies come to us from the right, and that when Democrats lie, they often sometimes apologize, she said, sort of shrugging up her shoulders, like, oh, sorry, I didn't really mean it, but because that's the kind of thing we do. Whereas you found that the Republicans just sort of push on ahead. Help my listeners understand that it's not just some sort of crazy whim of yours, because journalists and their whims, that shows that Republicans do lie more.
Yeah. So I started to notice it when I was covering Congress. So this is not a Trump phenomenon. This began before Trump. I started to notice it when I was covering Congress in the early aughts, like 2000, 2001. And I noticed it get worse by 2007 when I started PolitiFact. Then you really saw it start to take root with Sarah Palin when John McCain picked Sarah Palin as his running mate, and you had the Tea Party movement, and that it sort of it was really becoming firmly part of the Republican culture. Now, people I interviewed, Republicans, said, former Republicans largely, said they believe that the turning point goes back to Newt Gingrich in the early 1990s, that he sort of established this culture of anything goes. It's perfectly okay to lie for us to win. So anyway, that's and I've got lots of people in the book talking about why Republicans lie more. And to back it up, I use numbers from Politifact and the Washington Post fact checker to show just this tremendous imbalance that the Republicans get a lot more false and pants on fire ratings from Politifact, and they get considerably more 4 Pinocchio and 3 Pinocchio ratings from the Washington Post. And to sort of really make sure I was right about that, we removed Donald Trump from the calculations. So this is not skewed by Donald Trump. This is true without Donald Trump. But of course, and our numbers were also for 2015 to 2021. It's only gotten worse since then because of the big lie about the 2020 election. So I think the numbers are overwhelming and incredibly convincing. Now, I know that Republicans will reject them and say there's bias and whatever, and I think that's just part of our polarized media environment, and so I expect that reaction. But I just think it's really incredibly stark, the difference, and it's worrisome because with this asymmetry in lying, we cannot have a conversation about immigration. We can't have a conversation about climate. We can't have a conversation about the most basic things because there's little agreement on facts, and the parties spend all this time attacking each other, and the Republicans denying basic facts, and we can't solve these important problems if we don't have the building blocks, facts, to be able to discuss our policy options.
This idea that you have facts to back up what we would call facts, and that seems to be disregarded by people, is a little too much for my brain to kind of handle, right? Because I'm showing you proof. But the issue of the big lie is pervasive still. COVID and the dangers of lying about COVID and the number of people who must have died or not gotten the treatment they needed because of lies about COVID and currently lies about immigration. It's obvious to anybody who is reading more than about Bat Boy that lying is ingrained in our system. And it's interesting that you decided to take Donald Trump out of the equation, because one of the comments that I had for you is, oh, well, we're all going to feel better because if Donald Trump doesn't win or whatever. I just made a prayer symbol to all you, praying face. If Donald Trump doesn't win, then maybe things will calm down. And then I thought to myself, oh, right, we have 40-year-old J.D. Vance, who, when told that the idea that people in Springfield, Ohio were not actually eating cats, kept pushing back and saying, well, I have to say these things, he says finally, to get the media to pay attention to me.
Yeah, that was really that was not the way it used to go down, of course. It used to be that if any politician, Republican or Democrat, was called out on something false like that, they would express shame. They'd be like, "Oh man, I got that wrong. I am so sorry." And now the lies are lies. It's not like these are misstatements. Like, oh, I'm sorry. Did I say cats? I meant something else.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, they are so deliberate now in their lying. Here's something else. And they also lie without actually lying. Here's something that J.D. Vance did at the debate that was incredibly sly. So the topic was shootings in schools. And so J.D. Vance expresses concern. I'm a father. I've got 3 kids or 2 kids, and it worries me, and it's terrible what's happening. And what really worries me is those guns coming over the border, that are being used here. And then, but the school shootings happen, and isn't it terrible? And the implication, so what he's done there is not actually lie, because if you look at the sentences, and he never actually links those two things, but there's this innuendo buried in that paragraph that is so sly. It's really smart, in the way he does it. And so plenty of people, I'm sure, heard that and are like, Mabel, did you hear that they're bringing guns here and shooting up elementary schools? And so he's good. And yet he never said that. But he's amazing.
He's good. And at the start of his career. So what do we do? Well, it's a simple question. If you could just get on that thing.
Yeah. If it's like when you're my answer to everything is we need more fact checkers, which is like if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I do believe that fact checkers and journalists that do political fact checking provide this important ground truth that, hey, and they were quick. I mean, the reason we know that the Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, one, are, for the most part, there legally, and two, are not eating neither dogs nor cats, is because of great fact-checking journalists.
Right.
So we need more of that in Springfield, Ohio, and Springfield, Massachusetts, and all the other Springfields everywhere. So I do think we need a lot more of this to lay the ground truth so that we can counteract these lies. I think that's part of it. Then the other thing is we need, and I say we, I think journalism needs to be more assertive. I talk about this in the book, needs to be more assertive and innovative in getting our work out to the people who need it. Right now, it's not reaching people on the right very well, partly because of all these attacks on the right. But also, I think we need to think about creative ways to package fact-checking, even ways we haven't thought of yet, that are not just wait for Mabel to come to the website. Because Mabel isn't coming to the website. And so we need to do a better job.
And we should name more people Mabel also, because it's a great name. No one can tell because this is a podcast, but I'm sort of beaming along as you talk and nodding my head. Yes, 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 absolutely. One of the phrases that popped out to me from you tell I found wrenching and also heartwarming but mostly wrenching story about the woman who went to head up the Ministry of Truth for the government, Ms. Jankowicz, who brought a lawsuit against Fox and you can explain this further or in greater detail, but her lawsuit was thrown out because they said that the sources that spoke out against her were, quote, opinionated commentary. And it's the opinionated commentary that is causing the problems in this world. And it's really hard to explain to people that it's not the news, it's opinionated commentary. So I wonder if there's some... If it's not even just so much fact checking, it's educating people to what the difference is. And by people, I mean like folks my age, the difference between the news and this new thing that is opinionated commentary. Not new, but it's widespread.
So I'm going to give an interesting answer, and it's going to end with defamation is a high bar.
Okay.
So Nina Jankowicz is in many ways the main character in my book. And so it's a book about political lying, but it's really a book with stories about people who are affected by political lying. Because I didn't just want to write a book that was like, let me add up the numbers of political lies and tell you about them, because I realized that's a pretty boring book.
Right. Lying liars and the lying liars who love them. Yes.
Yeah. When I looked into the stories of people who are affected by lies, I found them really compelling. And so Nina, in many ways, is the main character of the book. She's in 3 chapters plus the epilogue. And so she is a really fascinating person, dedicated to public service. She gets put in charge of this agency, the Department of Homeland Security, that has the worst name ever given to a government agency, the Disinformation Governance Board. It's like they flipped through 1984 and said, hey, what should we call this thing? And this is the Biden administration that does this. So they, and it's an agency with a good mission. The mission is to bring together all the different agencies in the Department of Homeland Security and help them work together to combat disinformation. But they give it this terrible name, and then they do an awful job announcing it because they don't really announce it. They just leak it to Politico. And so Politico puts it out in a 4-sentence newsletter announcement, and that's it. And so there's no explanation of how they're going to do this, what it's going to do with any detail. And so it takes like an hour, and suddenly the right is attacking it as the Ministry of Truth, like it is from 1984, and attacking Nina. And it takes conservatives on Twitter about 2 hours to dig up embarrassing songs that Nina performed when she was in college and high school, and they just begin lying about what the board would do. They begin lying about Nina, and the lies just snowball. And the Biden administration responds by doing nothing. They just are silent because that's how DHS usually operates. It has a communications office that does no communications. And so they just sit back and get pummeled. And the lies mountain, and they, next thing you know, it's on Fox, and the people on Fox are lying about it, and people on talk radio are lying about it, and House Republicans march down to the floor of the House and lie about it. And eventually it gets to the White House press room, and Jen Psaki is like, I don't know. She doesn't know what's going on. And so it's terrible. And this goes on, and Nina starts to get death threats and threats of violence and all these horrible things because of the lies. And it's just such a sad story. So this goes on, and eventually Nina sues Fox, and thought, because of the Dominion lawsuit from the election, Dominion Voting Systems, which got that giant $787 million settlement, Nina had some hope that she could beat Fox. So Nina sues Fox, but Nina's working from some disadvantages. She doesn't have the big legal support that Dominion had. And turns out she has a judge who doesn't look favorably on this, a judge in federal court in Delaware. And so, as you noted, the case got dismissed. She's now appealing. So, to come back to what I promised, defamation is a high bar.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We are left looking, and I'll begin to wrap this interview up because you probably have other things to do with your life.
I hope we are gonna talk about beer.
We are totally. I'm getting to. I have tried to do this like very sexy segue to beer. Well, we'll get there. But we are confronted right now with not the end of lies, but on November 5th, the explosion of lies that will happen, undoubtedly. I bet you a case of beer over the election results. Donald Trump warned about this beforehand, in the last election cycle, and look what happened. Is there a way to combat this before it happens on November 5th? Is there some way that we can gird our own loins just as average citizens, stepping aside from the fact that, like you and I are journalist types? How do we protect the people out there who are just watching opinionated commentary?
Yes. One, I will not take your bet because you're right. And I think that here's how we prepare, and here's how governments need to prepare. So there's a concept known as pre-bunking. When you know an entity is going to lie, you prepare your audience for it. So, and you do that in two ways. The original concept of pre-bunking was you prepare them by telling them the ways that entity is going to lie. So, hey, you're going to get messages in these formats, and they're going to make these types of claims, and be ready for that. But that now the term has taken on the meaning, here are the claims you're likely to hear. Don't believe them for these reasons. And so, or at least if you don't say don't believe them, here are the facts about those things. So, you may hear that more people voted in a Democratic city than there were voters in that city, which is that was a common technique that was tried in 2020. Here is why that can't happen. One, the average vote turnout in cities is thus. We think it's going to be thus in this election, even with the best turnout, blank. We'll see. You put that out ahead of time, and you sort of get ahead of that lie. Ballot control. So, you could sort of go through what are the likely lies that are going to be used. And you could basically script today what Donald Trump is going to say on November 6th.
Absolutely.
That would be a fun exercise. Get my students to write Donald Trump's speech that he's going to give at 2 a.m. on November 6th. And the student who comes closest, gets a case of IPA.
I think that, please do that. Please do that. Please do that. Because I'd like to see it. I mean, that could be a great, and maybe a writing exercise that I give to my Substack readers as well. And I'll give them, and the winner, I'll give them a copy of your book.
There you go. Sure.
And they can buy their own IPA. I probably can't ship it. But speaking of IPAs, as we wrap up this, and I'm not suggesting that drinking is a way out or a way of girding our loins or any of those sorts of things. But you did mention, because this is also usually a podcast in which I cook or talk about food with my guests, because the world is full of lying liars and the lying liars who love them, and it's hard. And that's why we sort of try and balance it out with the other things that are going on. And I'm in the midst of writing a cookbook about chocolate chips, cookies, and all the different. So if you can't see it, but I will take a photograph for my readers. But the computer is resting on a 3-pound tub of chocolate chips. But you, so I've seen myself through the writing of my book by eating chocolate chip cookies. No big surprise there. But you said that you are an IPA specialist. I'm calling you that because I'm not. And you enjoyed an IPA here or there while you were writing your book. Do you consider yourself a specialist?
I don't consider myself a specialist, but I definitely enjoy. IPAs are my favorite kind of beer. They're a little more potent. And when I was writing the book, I would reward myself at the end of writing days with one or two. And I'm fortunate to live in a state that has some great breweries, some here in Durham and some in Asheville, although sadly they're all shut down now because of Helene. But I love a good IPA. India Pale Ale is what it stands for. And I love the hazy IPAs, which are the, oddly, and this has never made sense to me, West Coast IPAs are a little more bitter, and the East Coast IPAs are more hazy, meaning they have a little more fruit to them. And it's sort of, you would think it would be the other way around, So
I certainly am more bitter, but go on.
But I love, my favorite IPA is from Asheville, Wicked Weed is the brewery, and it's called Pernicious. And it lives up to its name. It's a little sneaky, and I just love it. And so my wife and I go there when we go to Asheville. She's always very accommodating and goes with me to the brewery. And then here in Durham, I love Full Steam, which is a brewery here, and they make an IPA called Rocket Science that I love. That's
a great name for a beer. I wonder if there's a way, and I'll look into this and put it in the show notes, if there's a way we can support IPA breweries. A word I really have trouble saying, breweries. If we can, and that's without a beer. Okay, guys, this is just 10:52 in the morning.
Yeah, I know. To be clear, I have not been drinking either, only coffee. So.
Yeah, me too. I'm just having a coffee, which should be called Pernicious. If there's a way that we can help the breweries down and that have been affected by or impacted by.
And they really have been. Some of them are down in the River District of Asheville, which has just been wiped out. New Belgium was down there right on the water, and several others, and just devastated, flooded terribly. Wicked Weed's on higher ground, and I imagine will reopen in the not too distant future. At least one of its locations. So, but many of them were low lying and flooded. So it's really sad.
Okay, well, I think I will look into that and put something about what we can do in the show notes. And what am I supposed to do? What are the people who come up to me as our final question when I speak to somebody and I say, but no, illegal immigrants aren't coming across the border with guns, and no, this isn't true and that isn't true, and I could think of 100 things. I always have like something I want to say to somebody who says I'm a Trump supporter. Their answer to me will just as easily be, well, that's a lie. What do you do?
Send them to a nonpartisan fact checker, and it doesn't have to be Politifact. It can be, there's a good conservative fact checker. The Dispatch, which is a conservative publication, does some great fact checking. So one of the things that I've mused about is somebody needs to collect all the fact checking sites together and sort of be a scoreboard to pull everything together, and that wouldn't be that hard, but because there's some great fact checking going on by lots of different organizations, and no one pulls it all together. So that'd be a great service. But yeah, I think that's the place. Like there are trusted places to go, and they're not all, frankly, the independent fact checkers, Politifact, factcheck.org, are nonpartisan. But if somebody's conservative, they could go to the Dispatch and get great fact checking there.
And what do you do when you meet people like that? Like, is that your, like when you meet people like, nah.
I'm usually not in the type of conversation where I would say, well, I guess sometimes I am. Yeah, I guess I do encourage them. I usually encourage them to go to Politifact. And I'll say something like, that's not how I understand it. You might want to look that up. And I think Politifact has written a good piece about that. Like here in North Carolina, there's a local Politifact fact checker that's done some great work on the false claims about the relief from the hurricane. And so, so I've tried to steer people to that. So yeah, it just needs to be gentle. And I think that's one of the things we tend to, and I know this as a Duke basketball fan, we tend to get passionate about our team.
Yeah. Frothing at the mouth never helps. Getting overly passionate never helps. And I think we just need to build up the fact checker as superhero. And your book does.
I'm with
right.
I'm for that, Marissa. That's great.
That'll be the next the TV show that comes out of this. So I do think you could maybe sell the rights to the Jankowitz story for a very good, nice movie. So if there are any agents out there listening, you should do that. Your book is Beyond the Big Lie. That's a burning red tie on it. Why red?
I wonder where that came from.
Unusually long red tie. Anyway, the epidemic of political lying, why Republicans do it more, and how it can burn down our democracy. Thank you for the wise words this morning. And I now know what I'm going to teach in an hour to my class. So thank you very much.
This was great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us on this week's podcast. You can find Bill's book, Beyond the Big Lie, wherever fine books are sold. And if you would, please leave a review of the podcast on Apple. Every little bit helps, and I am grateful. Thank you. Stay strong, and remind everyone you know to check to make sure they are registered to vote and to vote early. Have a great week.
Think Verizon is expensive? Think again. Anyone can bring their AT&T or T-Mobile bill to a Verizon store today and we'll give you a better deal. So bring us your bill. Walk in, run in, pogo stick in, teleport if you can. Ride on the back of a rollerblading yak or fly in on the wings of a majestic falcon. Any way you can, bring your AT&T or T-Mobile bill to a Verizon store today and we'll give you a better deal on the best network. Based on RootMetrics Best Overall Mobile Network Performance, U.S. second half 2025. All rights reserved. Must provide very recent postpaid consumer mobile bill in the name of the person redeeming the deal. Additional terms, conditions, and restrictions apply.